What's up guys, Roddy Lemon here, and in this tutorial series I'm going to be showing you how to create shooting mechanics and details similar to the ones shown in this simple game I've made using Unity. I've got my Unity project set up with a player character, a simple idle animation, and some artwork. And the first thing I'm going to do is on our player character object I'm just going to create an empty object. I'm going to call this weapon. Under the weapon, I'm going to take that gun that I imported for the artwork. I'm just going to go ahead and drop that in there. As you can see, it's showing up behind the player. That's because of the sorting layer. So I'm just going to go ahead and make sure that the gun shows up on top of the player. Stop that idle animation real quick. And then here I can kind of adjust where the gun sits. So I think it's a little high right now. I'm just going to go ahead and move it down a little bit. And then, no, actually I'm going to leave it right there. So here, if we try to rotate the gun like in a twin stick shooter, it's going to rotate right in the center of the gun. When really we probably want it to rotate closer to where the handle is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the sprites that I have, I'm going to edit them, and we have this center right here on the sprite. So I can just move this over here, and that'll change where the pivot is on the sprite that you're playing around with. So I'm going to apply that. Yep, sweet. So then back in our game, you can see now the gun shows up right in the center of the player, which is, I think, right where we want it. Now let's go ahead and start working on a script to actually control what this weapon's doing. So I have a little scripts folder set up. It's empty right now. I'm just going to right click, create a new C# script. I'm just going to call this weapon. And let's go ahead and open that up. Alright, in this script I think the first thing I want to start with is user input. Specifically what I'm interested in is the aim direction, which I think I'm going to capture using the mouse, and then whether or not the player is firing the weapon, which I'm going to try and capture using the left mouse button. So with that in mind, let's create the first function for aiming. So this will return a quaternion. Quaternions are used to represent rotations in Unity, and we'll call this function aim direction. Alright, so with aim direction, the first thing that we need to do is actually capture direction, right? So we need to know where we're aiming. And to do that, I'm going to do vector, I'm going to create a vector2, I'm going to call it direction. We're going to set that equal to the camera.main.screen to world point. And to that, I'm going to pass the input mouse position. So what this is going to do is it's actually going to give us a point on the screen that represents the current location of the mouse. And what we need to do is actually create a directional vector. So to do that, we're going to subtract our current transform dot position. So that'll give us a directional vector in relation to where we currently are on the map. So between the mouse and our current user. Next thing, I'm going to need to calculate an angle from that direction. So what I'll do is I'll create a float angle, and we'll set that equal to some fun math. You can just trust that this works. Pass in the direction Y, direction X, and then we're going to multiply that by mathf.radians to degrees. And then what we want to do is actually compute a quaternion from this angle, so we'll do that by returning a new quaternion dot angle axis. Yes, and we're going to pass in that angle, and we want the vector 3 dot forward. That's the second argument here. All right, cool. So that should take care of our aim direction. And actually, let's go ahead and see if that works real quick. So I'm going to say this dot rotation is equal to, let's set that equal to our aim direction. Is that, oh, this dot transform dot rotation. Perfect, okay. So we're setting our transform's rotation to the aim direction. Perfect, let's go see if that works in Unity. So the first thing we're going to want to do is actually add that weapon script that we wrote to the weapon. So I'm just going to click, drag, and drop that onto the weapon. Alright, and it shows up as a component, so now let's hit play. Perfect. And as you can see, the gun follows my mouse position. Now let's go finish writing the attack function. So for our attack function, I think we're going to want to return a Boolean whether or not the player is actually trying to attack. And to capture that, we're going to return the input.get mouse button 0, and that'll be correlated to the left mouse button. And similarly, we can do something like this. So since this is returning a Boolean, we can just say if attack. So if that returns true, let's just print something to the console for now. Debug.log attack. All right, and now we can actually test and see if that worked as well. Oops, not single quotes, we need double quotes. There we go, okay. Excellent. As you can see in the console over there, whenever I click or hold the mouse button, it starts logging attack. So, perfect, it's working as expected. Next, let's actually shoot something. So let's create a projectile to fire.
So I'm just going to go to my project tab, and in my sprites folder, I have a bullet that I've already imported into the game. So I'm just going to drag and drop that in. I'm going to call it bullet. And let's see, first thing I think we need to do is actually create a script to govern this bullet. So I'm just going to go to the scripts folder, right click, create C# script. I'm going to call it bullet. Alright, now let's open that up and start coding. Cool. So, let's see. Basically, the bullet just needs to move. So I'm just going to, in the update, do a transform.translate. We're going to go vector2.right, because that's the direction the art's in, and then we're going to multiply that by speed, and then multiply that by time.delta time. Cool. So speed is a variable that we're going to add to it. At the top, we're going to go public speed, and let's give it a default value of maybe 5. Oh, public foot speed. There we go. That way it'll have a nice default value, but if we want to change that in Unity, we're able to. So I'm going to save that, and back in Unity.
While we're here, I'm also just going to go ahead and update the weapon script to have a reference to that bullet object that we're creating. So I'm going to say public game object bullet, and what we're going to do with that bullet is down here in the where we're trying to attack, instead of actually attacking, I'm just going to instantiate that bullet at our current transform.position, and we're going to instantiate the bullet with our transform.rotation. Perfect. Okay. Now let's go set up the bullet in Unity. To do that, I'm going to take that bullet script we just created. I'm going to drag and drop it onto the bullet. And what I want to do now is actually make this bullet into what's called a prefab. Prefab is just like a game object with a predetermined set number of components and things like that on it, so that you can instantiate a copy of it very easily. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into shooting tutorial. I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call it prefabs. Now in prefabs, I'm going to grab that bullet. I'm just going to drag it into here. And there we go. That's all we had to do. And I can delete it from the scene now. Now on the weapon, we added a new variable for the bullet. So from our prefab folder, I'm going to drag and drop it into there. So now our weapon script has a reference to that bullet. So if I hit play, fingers crossed, everything should just work. Perfect. And as you can see, I'm shooting all sorts of bullets, though I am shooting it from the center of our gun. Let's fix that. To do that, I'm actually going to create a new game object on the weapon. So let's create an empty one. I'm just going to call this fire point. Now we just want to move the fire point to the end of the barrel where the bullets should actually be firing from. I think that looks pretty good right there, probably, maybe a little bit further out. Excellent. Now I need to actually have a reference to that fire point in my weapon script. So I'm going to go into our script and actually update that as well. So I'm just going to add a new variable here at the top of the weapon script. I'm going to call it public transform, and we're going to call it fire point. Now down here in our update where we're attacking, instead of instantiating the bullet at our transform position, what I'm going to do is I'm going to instantiate it at the fire point dot position. Cool. Now back in Unity, I just have to set this transform, the fire point, and then we should be good to go. So I'll just drag the fire point game object that we just created into the fire point variable on the weapon script. So just drag, drop that. Now let's see if that worked. Excellent. Now I'm shooting bullets from the end of my gun. One thing here though is you can see how fast I'm firing, which is quite fast. So next let's limit our actual fire rate. So let's go back to our script and make some changes. So the first thing we're going to need to do to be able to limit our rate of fire is create a few new variables in our weapon script. One of them will be called fire rate, which is how fast we can shoot our gun, and the other one will be a private variable called timestamp. And that we'll use that to keep track of how much time has elapsed since we last fired. So to begin with, timestamp will be set equal to 0. And what we'll do is in our update function, we'll say if attack, so if we're trying to attack and timestamp is greater than or equal to our fire rate, we can fire. And so in here, what we'll need to do is set our timestamp back to 0. And of course, we also need our timestamp to constantly be updating. So what we'll do is our timestamp will be set equal to time.delta time. So that's how we'll keep track of how much time has elapsed. And then whenever we pass our fire rate, we're then going to be able to fire, and we'll set our timestamp back to 0. So let's go set those variables up in our inspector in Unity. So our fire rate is expressed in terms of seconds. So let's set it to something kind of low first. So let's do 0.25, a quarter of a second. So every quarter of a second, we're going to be able to shoot our gun. So let's see how that looks. Nice. And now I'm able to shoot a bullet every quarter of a second. One thing I actually forgot to do with the bullet is create a way of cleaning them up after I don't care about them anymore. So basically, after they go off the screen, I probably just want to destroy them. So Unity has a built-in function for this. It's called void on became invisible. So when a game object leaves the current screen, I can do destroy game object. And that way I don't just have a million bullets flying around in my scene even after they go off the screen and I don't care about them anymore. And there we go. We just finished creating the core mechanic of firing a weapon in a twin stick shooter. From here there's a lot we can do to make this feel a lot nicer. As you can see, it kind of feels a little bit, I don't know, plain. Like there's not much going on here. Specifically what we can do to juice this up is we can add muzzle flash, barrel smoke, weapon kick, bullet shells, shot variants, camera lerp, and we can even have the weapon flip so it doesn't look like it's upside down when we're firing in this direction. Thanks for watching, guys. Hope you liked it. If you did, subscribe, drop a like, leave a comment, let me know what you think, and stay tuned for more game development content in the future.